How did a movie about an 18th century king become one of the most terrifyingly honest depictions of medical torture and mental collapse ever filmed? Welcome to WN Movie Talk, what? Today we are dissecting Film 4's The Madness of King George, from the blue urine mystery to the performance that should have won the Oscar, yet nearly didn't even get the role. But before we get into discussion in full, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more WN Movie Talk. We've got plenty more treasures to pull from the shelves. Now, before we take a look at the film itself, we have to talk about where this story started. It began as a stage play called The Madness of George the Third, written by the legendary humorist Alan Bennett. Now, let's face it, Bennett's name is a hallmark of quality. He has this unique ability to take a massive historical moment and make it feel incredibly intimate and, quite frankly, very funny in a dark way. The play premiered at the National Theatre in London in 1991, directed by Nicholas Hytner and starring Nigel Hawthorne. It was a massive critical hit, but as we know, taking a stage play and turning it into a movie is a dangerous game. They can often feel stuffy, static or locked in, but Hytner, who also directed the film, turned a theatrical experience into a cinematic one. The real genius of this adaptation is how it handled the transition of the lead role. In the early 90s, studios were obsessed with bankable star power, and frankly the executives at Film 4 just didn't see that in Nigel Hawthorne. Now, for us in the UK, Hawthorne was a household name, a master of timing, most famous for his role as the brilliantly manipulative Sir Humphrey in the BBC's classic and timeless comedy Yes Minister. But to a studio executive looking at the American market, the prospect of selling a period drama without a heavyweight like Anthony Hopkins seemed like a dangerous gamble. However, Hytner and Bennett refused to budge. They fought the studios to keep Hawthorne, and thank God they did. They knew that after hundreds of performances on the London stage, Hawthorne didn't just play the king, he possessed him. And when you watch this film, you aren't watching an actor trying out a character for a few weeks on a film set. You're watching a man who lived in that king's skin for years. And it's the reason that the film feels so raw and immediate. And speaking of studio interferences, there is a legendary bit of trivia regarding the title itself. In the UK, the play was called The Madness of George the Third, but when it came to the US release of the movie, the studio dropped the 3 and changed it to The Madness of King George. Why? They were terrified that American audiences would think that it was a sequel, and they wouldn't go to see it because they hadn't seen The Madness of King George 1 or 2. The film's director actually admits that this was part of the logic, though they also wanted to include the word king in the title, which was missing from the Alan Bennett stage play. While Hawthorne is the son of this movie, the Ensemble orbit him with incredible precision. Helen Mirren as Queen Charlotte provides the film's emotional anchor. Her performance is a masterclass in restrained grief. And then you have a young Amanda Donoghue and even Julian Rind-Tutt in early roles. I mentioned that this film was produced on merit, and nothing proves that more than the actors filling the roles of the royal physicians. These are some of the finest character actors that Britain has ever produced. They bring a sycophantic, nervous energy that makes the great offices of state feel like a panicked high school locker room. These men represent the old guard, the establishment that is terrified of losing its influence. And it makes the king's isolation feel even more real because he is surrounded by people who are experts on paper but utterly out of their depth in practice. To further understand the tension in this film, you also have to understand the political cliff edge that England was standing on in 1788. King George III, who was the glue holding the government together. If he was deemed mad, then he was unfit to rule, which would trigger a constitutional crisis. In one corner you have the King's Loyalists, led by Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger, desperately trying to hide the King's condition to keep the country stable. In the other corner you have the Prince of Wales himself, the future George IV, played by Rupert Everett. Now, for UK fans of 80s sitcoms, the Prince of Wales is the exact same historical figure as the dim-witted Prince Regent from Blackadder the Third, as portrayed by Hugh Laurie. But whilst Blackadder played him for laughs, this film shows the darker side of that rivalry. In the hands of Rupert Everett, we meet a son who isn't just waiting for his father to die, but a callous, self-serving and calculating antagonist who is actively trying to prove his father's insanity. The king's son is circling the king like a vulture, waiting to be declared regent so he can seize power and install his own government. But there's also another ghost haunting this entire story: America. We have to remember that this crisis happened just a few years after the British surrender at Yorktown and the colonies, now known as the United States, and they finally declared their independence from the sovereignty of England. To the world, George the Third was the king who lost the United States, and in the film you can see this anxiety weighing on him. It's not just medical unravelling, it's the crushing guilt of a man who watched his empire shrink. It changes how we view his madness. Is he losing his mind because of a physical disease, or is he just cracking under the literal weight of history? And when you see him wandering the halls of Windsor, he isn't just a confused old man, he is a man trying to outrun the shame of losing a continent. Before the darkness descends, the film does a brilliant job of showing us exactly who George III was at the height of his powers. We don't meet a doddering old man, we meet a king who is vibrant, curious and deeply connected to his people. He is portrayed with an almost encyclopedic knowledge of his subjects. He knows their names, their families, their businesses. It's a performance of high energy, showing a man whose mind is moving faster than anyone else in the room. We also see his domestic side, his relationship with Queen Charlotte, his Mrs. King. They are a team surrounded by a swarm of children, providing a sense of stability that the country relies on. There is the failed assassination attempt. When a woman lunges at him with a fruit knife, George is completely unfazed. He doesn't retreat in fear, instead he shows a genuine, almost paternal concern for her mental state, and it establishes him as a man of immense fortitude, which makes the coming collapse all the more tragic. To help us navigate the court, the film introduces us to Captain Grenville. Through his eyes we learn the suffocating etiquette: never look the king in the eye, never speak unless spoken to, and never turn your back on him. These aren't just stuffy rules, they are the framework of the king's reality. And by showing us how strictly these laws are followed at the start, the film sets a trap. Later, when the madness takes hold and these rules are shattered, when the king is touched, restrained and shouted at, the impact is visceral. We feel the sacrilege because we've seen the sanctity. The costumes by Mark Thompson also accentuate this decline. In the beginning, the king's garments are heavy and ornate, they are his armour. But as the madness takes hold, there is a terrifying transition from velvet and gold to the cold, dirty white linen of a patient's smock. And by the time he's in that restraint chair, the contrast between the clinical white of his nightshirt and the dark predatory suits of the physicians tell you everything about who holds the power. Now we get to the heart of the survival horror. When the king's mind starts to slip, the palace doors are thrown open to the best medical minds in the 18th century. But in 1788, the best was barbaric. And in the movie, we see the physicians blister his back and legs with hot glass to draw out the humours. It is a total invasion of the king's body. Amidst this, we meet Dr. Francis Willis, played with steel-eyed intensity by Ian Holm. He brings the restraint chair, a literal throne of torture. But listen for the cinematic genius in the sound design here. As George is forced into that chair, the soundtrack fires up Handel's Zadok the Priest. Now this is the traditional coronation anthem, and hearing the music of a god king while seeing a man treated like an animal creates an incredible biting irony. And yet we soon realise that Willis is actually the only forward-thinking doctor here. He focuses on behaviour and discipline. His methods are brutal, breaking the king's spirit like a horse trainer. But he is the first person to look at George as a patient rather than a political problem, and it creates a moral grey area. We hate Willis for stripping the king's dignity, yet we realise he might be the only man capable of saving him. And while the doctors attacked his body, the Prince of Wales attacked his dignity. Rupert Everett's prince lived a life of debt and scandal, the exact opposite of his father's frugal court. As soon as the king slipped, the prince moved to dismantle his power base, most cruelly by separating the king and queen. This was psychological warfare. By removing Mrs. King, the prince ensured that the king had no advocate. It also neutralised Queen Charlotte. It's a moment of social horror that shows that the prince is willing to break his parents' hearts just to wear a crown that isn't his yet. For a film built on such a modest budget, its success was staggering. Critics were floored by the blend of historical tact and psychological grit, and the award ceremonies reflected that. The film received 4 Academy Award nominations, including Best Actor for Hawthorne and Best Supporting Actress for Mirren. While Hawthorne famously lost out to Tom Hanks in Forrest Gump, the film did take home the Oscar for Best Art Direction. And over at the BAFTAs, winning Outstanding British Film, securing a Best Actor win for Nigel Hawthorne. Even at Cannes, the film made waves, with Helen Mirren taking home Best Actress Award and the director being nominated for the Palme d'Or. Commercially, it was a rare beast, a prestige period drama that became a breakout hit, and it proved that audiences were hungry for intelligent, character-driven storytelling. So my final verdict on this 1994 treasure, The Madness of King George, is a rare breed of a film. It manages to be historically significant without being dry, and deeply theatrical without being static. Above all, it's a human story, and Nigel Hawthorne gives arguably one of the greatest performances of the 90s, a portrayal of a man losing his identity while everyone around him tries to steal his crown. It represents a pinnacle of 90s British filmmaking where the script was king and the performances were everything. But what do you think? Have you seen this one, or is this one of those 90s gems that slipped under your radar? Do you enjoy historical costume dramas? And if so, which others are worth looking into? Let me know in the comments below. I love hearing what's on your shelves.